For thousands of years, the buffalo thundered across the Great Plains, a vast sea of grassland rising from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Living off the herds were a scattering of nomadic Indian nations.
My grandmother told me that when she was young, the people themselves had to walk. In those times, they did not travel far nor often.
In 1680, the Spanish were driven out of the Southwest by the Pueblo nations. As they fled, they left behind their horse herds, an animal that would change the way of life for Indian nations across the continent.
When they got horses, they could move more easily from place to place. Then they could kill more of the buffalo and other animals. And so they got more meat for food and gathered more skins for lodges and clothing. Iron Teeth, Cheyenne.
A new culture developed based on the relationship between man and horse.
My horse fights with me, and he fasts with me. Because if he is to carry me into battle, he must know my heart, and I must know his, or we shall never become brothers. I've been told that the white man, who's almost a god, and yet a great fool, does not believe that the horse has a spirit. This cannot be true. I have many times seen my horse's soul in his eyes. Plenty coo, crow.
With the coming of the horse, the nations of the plains would become legendary. The Crow, Cheyenne, Sioux, Blackfeet, Arapaho, Pawnee, Kiowa, Comanche, and for generations, their way of life flourished. Then in 1858, gold was discovered at Pikes Peak, Colorado. 4 years later, the Homestead Act opened the region to white settlement. Almost instantly, the invasion became a flood. In 1 year alone, 100,000 immigrants swarmed across the plains over 2 main roads, spreading a wide swath of destruction. To protect travel on the immigrant roads, the United States erected a network of forts across the plains and churned out cadets at West Point specially trained for Indian warfare. It was the Army's mission to force mobile nations who hunted over large territories onto confined areas, reservations. Indian people were faced with only 2 options: to give up their homelands and way of life, or fight the American army. Although some chose armed resistance, many Indian leaders responsible for the protection of large villages of women, children, and elderly saw little hope in fighting. Among these were 2 Cheyenne leaders, Black Kettle and White Antelope. They were willing to give up lands to maintain peace and bring their people safely through the dangerous era.
So they felt that it was their duty to go out and make peace with the United States, so they did.
Black Kettle and White Antelope ceded vast Cheyenne lands to the United States in 1861 and agreed to confine themselves to a reservation in exchange for protection from soldiers and settlers and assistance of food and money to replace lost hunting lands. They then traveled to Washington to meet with President Lincoln. Lincoln presented Black Kettle with a large American flag and White Antelope with a Medal of Peace. But over the next 3 years, continued unrest on the plains fanned rumors of an impending Indian war. In Denver, Governor John Evans inflamed public opinion by fabricating stories of Cheyenne hostilities and encouraged civilians to take up arms against them. Seeking protection for their peaceful bands, Black Kettle and White Antelope undertook the dangerous trip to Denver to meet with Governor Evans.
All we ask is that we may have peace with the whites. I want you to give all the chiefs of the soldiers here to understand that we are for peace, and that we have made peace, that we may not be mistaken by them for enemies. Black Kettle, Southern Cheyenne.
Black Kettle and White Antelope were promised safety for their people if they camped near Fort Lyon in southern Colorado. But the military commander of Colorado, Colonel John Chivington, had no plans for peace with any Indian people.
Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill them. Colonel John Chivington.
Black Kettle and White Antelope had been told where to camp, and that they had nothing to fear from the U.S. Army.
Why would they worry? They were under the protection of the American flag. They were under the protection of the international peace sign, the white flag.
At dawn on November 29th, 1864, Chivington's Colorado volunteers rode through the snow toward Black Kettle and White Antelope's sleeping camp at Sand Creek.
Two women were out picking up wood when they seen what they thought was buffalo, but it wasn't buffalo, and they threw down their sticks and started screaming and running towards the camp.
Cheyenne George Bent was startled awake.
I heard shouts and the noise of people running about the camp. I jumped up and ran out of my lodge. From down the creek, a large body of troops was advancing at a rapid trot. I looked toward the chief's lodge and saw Black Kettle had a large American flag tied to the end of a long lodge pole and was standing in front of his lodge holding the pole.
Chief Black Kettle, he was out there in front protecting his people to show them that he wasn't afraid, and he was trying to tell them that, we made peace, we're at peace.
Then the troops opened fire from two sides of the camps. The women and children were screaming and wailing, the men running to the lodges for their arms and shouting advice and directions to one another. White Antelope saw the soldiers shooting the people, and he did not wish to live any longer.
My great-great-grandfather, White Antelope, he felt heartbreak that another treaty had been broken, a peace that they had been seeking for a long time had been shattered, had been broken.
White Antelope stood in front of his lodge with his arms folded across his breast, singing the death song.
And he cried. He sung his song. Nothing lives long. He raised his arms. Nothing lives long but the earth and the mountains.
White Antelope, wearing the peace medal given him by President Lincoln, was shot dead in front of his lodge. Black Kettle and his wife ran toward the creek bed where people were desperately digging into the sand for protection. Before they could reach it, Black Kettle's wife was shot. Believing her dead, he ran on without her.
Most of us who were hiding in the pits had been wounded before we could reach the shelter. And there we lay all that bitter cold day, from early in the morning until almost dark, with the soldiers all around us, keeping up a heavy fire most of the time. They finally withdrew about 5 o'clock. As they retired down the creek, they killed all the wounded they could find. That night will never be forgotten as long as any of us who went through it are alive. Many who had lost wives, husbands, and children or friends went back down the creek and crept over the battleground among the naked, mutilated bodies of the dead. Few were found alive, for the soldiers had done their work thoroughly. George Bent, Southern Cheyenne.
Over 500 Southern Cheyenne people died. Black Kettle found his wife with 9 bullet wounds in her body, but miraculously, she was alive. The survivors straggled into another Cheyenne camp, while Chivington returned to Denver with over 100 Cheyenne scalps.
my people were massacred. Terrible thing. Their spirits are still there at the massacre site. They'll never rest.
Despite his loss, Black Kettle saw no hope in resistance. In 1868, his beleaguered band was camped along the Washita River on a government reservation. At dawn on November 27, 1868, almost 4 years to the day after the Sand Creek Massacre, U.S. Army troops under the command of George Armstrong Custer attacked the sleeping village. Black Kettle, his wife, and over 100 of his people were killed. The Cheyenne leader's quest for peace had come to a final, bitter end, costing him his lands, his freedom, and the lives of the people he had tried so desperately to protect.